Right. Someone started the recording now, right? Great, great. Okay. Right. So actually, before starting the recording, we have discussed about the assignment, right? So if you are listening to the recording only, right? So please ask from your student, your friends, what we have discussed before the starting the recording, because now only the recording has been started, right? Right. So this is basically a kind of a discussion, right, regarding the risk, right? So basically, we need to know what are the risks we are having, what are the categories of risk we are having. So when it's come to the organization, right? In organization, we are categorizing the risk in different ways, right? But when it's come to the businesses, right, we know the business or the organization are having the what? The business risk, right? Business risk. What do you mean by the business risk? What is the meaning of business risk? What do you mean by the business risk? Yes. So when you are doing a business, uh, the business will be involved in the risk. What do you mean by that? So we have in the first session regarding the which we have discussed regarding the risk management, right? I have told you the risk is what? Risk is what? It's a kind of a there's a two thing, upside risk and a downside risk, right? So as a businessman, as a company owner, right? Let's say if you are not taking the risk, you can't earn the return, right? So why we are doing a business? Definitely to earn a profit or earn a return, right? So therefore, we need to take the business risk. Definitely, we need to take the business risk. So when it's come to the companies or the organization, they are definitely involving with the business risk. And this business risk, they are categorized into kind of a different categories, right? The basic risk categories are the strategic risk and the operational risk, right? Strategic risk and the operational risk, right? So I will read this. Organization categorize the risk by type. This process help with identification of risk assessments in the risk management process, right? Risk identification part in the risk assessment part, it's very important to categorize or we need to identify the types of risk, right? It's kind of a provide some easiness to go with that process to identification the risk assessment part. There are no set rules for how to categorize the risk for each individual organization. So some companies are categorizing the risk like upside risk, downside risk. Some companies are categorizing risk as a strategic risk, operational risk. Some companies are categorizing these things as a different ways. But there's no kind of a set rules, right? අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම risk කිව්වොත් මේක තමයි කියන rule එකක් නැහැ, right? It's best to have good knowledge of the organization and consult with the directors and key employees to achieve it successfully. A key risk areas of organization is the business risk. This risk is to face by your organization because of the nature of the operation of the product, right? So why business are exposures to the business risk? Because of their product, because of their operations, right? For example, if you are involving with the what do you call the uh, international business, right? So definitely you need to involve with the exchange rate risk. That's a kind of a business risk to that company, right? Because of your operations, right? If you are involving with the company's competitive product, right? So you are getting a risk of competition, right? Right. And if you are involved with the kind of a health product which we have discussed in the last week, if you can remember, right? Right. You are getting a kind of a safety risk because of your operations. So those are kind of business risks that we are having, right? So some business are inherently riskier than the others, right? Right. Some other companies ගොඩක් risk අනික් companies එක compare කරලා බලන්න, right? Business risk can be further sub-analyzed into the strategic and the operational risk. So we can divide the business risk into two categories. One is operational risks and the second one is strategic risk, right? So when you are looking at the strategic risk, we know what you mean by the strategy is, right? Strategic decisions are made by the directors, right? That means strategic risk is arise in the high level, right? Right. Strategic risk is the higher level risk facing a business. It is a risk looking at the downsides that the business major decisions will adversely affect the success of the business or even cause it to fail. However, risk is a two-sided topic and good strategic decisions help the business survive and thrive. Right. Right. So that means how the strategic risks are coming up because of the strategic directions the directors are providing. Right. In the corporate governance things we have discussed what directors are doing. They are showing the strategic part to the company. Right. So when they are showing the strategic part to the companies, right, right, what will happen? There may be risk involved in these strategic decisions, right? For example, directors are decided to do the merger or acquisition, right? Right. Suddenly, after this acquisition happen, that acquired company can be collapsed, right? So that is kind of a strategic risk we are having, right? So if you are going to invest in a foreign country, we are going to expand our business to the foreign country. So that is a strategic decision we are making. But suddenly, what will happen? The war began, right? So now we can't do the business. So there will be a strategic risk, right? Right? There will be a strategic risk, right? Right. So when you're looking at the example, an example of a strategic risk could be introduction of the technology into the industry. This has been seen in numerous industries in recent years, whether it is buying product online or via an app like Amazon or eBay, for example, with the products being delivered to the purchaser doors. This has this had major impact on businesses that many thought were likely to be success for many years to come, such as traditional shops and shopping centers. Right, right. So you can see when it's come to the mostly when it's come to manufacturing business, right? When it's come to retail business, this technological integration is there, right? The basic level of technological integration is the online shopping, right? So we are having online shopping. So most of the business are moving to the online shopping. It's a kind of a strategic decision, right? So with that strategic decision, different risks can be there, right? Different strategic risks can be there. Strategic risks are addressed at board level, right? We know strategic risk is a higher level risk, right? Therefore, definitely the strategic risk should be addressed in what level? In a board level by management because these have an influence on the ability of business to achieve its strategic objectives. Right. So if you are having a strategic risk in your company, right, that means it's a kind of a impactful risk that will be limited the strategic objectives of the company. So therefore, these kind of a risk you need to address at the board level. Right? Board should be designed how to manage the strategic risk. What are the what are the precautions we are having? What are the actions we need to take regarding the strategic action regarding strategic risk? Is basically designed by the board level, right? Board level. And when we are compared to the strategic risk, operation is a very kind of a we can say if the strategic risk in a kind of a higher risk, but when it comes to the operational risk, it has below that, right? Because operational risk is arising because we are doing the day-to-day business, right? When you are doing the day-to-day business, business will face different risks, right? That we can basically categorize as the operational risk, right? Operational risk includes the uncertainties and hazards a business faces when it performs its day-to-day business activities within its fields or industry. Therefore, it is at lower level than the strategic risk of the business. Right? As I mentioned before, operational risk, මොනවද operational risk කියන්නේ? අපි business එකේ day-to-day activities කරද්දී අපිට එන risk. Right? උදාහරණයක් විදියට මම කරන්නේ manufacturing business එකක්. Right? ඒතර manufacturing business එකේ මම අද business එක start කරගෙන යද්දී එකපාරම මගේ machine එකක් කැඩෙනවා. Right? ඒතර මට production එක කරගෙන යන්න බැහැ. That is a kind of operational risk. Right? It's a kind of a lower risk than the strategic risk, because if the strategic risk is getting worse, it will definitely impact on your strategic objectives. But when the operational risk may be arise, it will distract your day-to-day operation only. Right? It will not hurt to your strategic objectives in a kind of a larger scale. Right? For example, if you have a kind of issue with your machines, right? So what you can do is you can repair the machine and correct that risk, right? Likewise. So there are numerous operational risks for any business or the organization, including the following: poorly performing sales and marketing staff. So that is a operational risk. Your staff are not performing well, right? The staff always sleeping, right? Doing nothing. Right? In most of the government organizations, we can see this operational risk. Right? What they are doing, they are just looking at the YouTube and enjoying their life. Right? Right? So that is a kind of operational risk to the company. Right? Failing to deliver to foreign customers on time. Right? If you are not providing your product on time, that will create the operational risk. Right? Even to the foreign customers or the local customers. Same. Right? දැන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ ගත්තොත් එහෙම Google review කියලා බලුවොත් එහෙම අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් කැම කටයකට අලුතෙන් යන අපි කන්න කොහේ හරි යනවනම් right සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අලුතෙන් තැනකට අලුතෙන් දාපු තැනකට යනවනම් අපි බලන්නේ මොකද්ද? නැත්නම් හොටෙල් එකක් බුක් කරන්න යනවනම් ඔයගොල්ලෝ මොකද කරන්නේ? බලනවා කියලා Google reviews මම දන්නේ නැහැ. මම කරන්නේ එහෙම. මොකද අපි බලනවා Google reviews මොනවද තියෙන්නේ? කවුද අනික් කට්ටිය මොනවද කියලා තියෙන්නේ? right? ඒතර අපි ඒකද බලන්නේ මොකද්ද? මේක හරියට ඔපරේට් වෙනවා. right? day to day business එක හරියට වෙනවද කියලා. right? Right? That is a kind of operation risk. So if you having a kind of a bad reviews from the customers, right? That's a operation risk. Right? Weak controls on ensuring money received in genuine or from foreign debt. Right? So you are having a weak controls. That's also operation risk. For example, you don't have a proper controls to protect your documents, right? You don't have a, let's say when it comes to the physical documents, right? You don't have a security guard, you don't have a CCTV, you don't have a dollar. When it comes to the kind of soft copies, you're not having any passwords to your laptops. You don't have a proper system to protect the soft copies, right? Likewise, right? Then a suitable management structure, centralized or decentralized, appropriate for the types of the business, right? Right. Sometimes some companies want to have a centralized decision-making platform. There's a central people is there, so they are making the decisions. Some companies they need to have a decentralized decision making. So based on your companies only, right? You need to decide whether what method you need to go, right? And rely on outside contractors. For example, maintenance staff for the machinery used in a factory, right? That's also a kind of operation risk. Inadequate recruitment methods, right? When you are recruiting the people, right? You are not looking at their backgrounds. You are not going to check their backgrounds. Just take them, right? When you are going to recruit the people to the finance division, we are not looking at their education background. We are recruiting the art people as well, right? So inadequate recruitment methods also create the operational risk to the company, right? Again, it is easier to look at things that can go wrong as before. Risk could be positive. Having a great workforce is like to help. Operational risks are commonly addressed with the internal control measures to detect and prevent process failures. Right? Operational risk අපි කොහොමද address කරන්නේ? Strategic risk address කරන්නේ board level එකේදී through the board decisions. Right? But when it comes to operational risk, mostly we are addressing using the internal control measures. Right? Because using the internal control measures, you can detect and prevent the process failures, basically the operational risks. Right? We can minimize it. Right? We can't prevent, but we can manage it using the internal control of the company. Right? Although that is very important, strategic risks are basically addressed by the board of directors. Right? The answers will be provided by the board of directors. For the operational risk, the answers will be provided by the internal control measures. Right? Although the board retain overall responsibility for ensuring appropriate measures are taken, the specific management of each area held accountable for the implementation. Right. So when it comes to these internal control measures, the board is having an overall responsibility regarding these internal control measures. But when it comes to the operational sort of thing, right? There are some operational managers who are involved in with the operation sort of work. So they are accountable regarding this internal control measures. Right. Regarding these internal control measures. Right. So there are many more operational risks other than the proceedings. It is worth thinking of types of the business, the input, process and output, and larger factors such as human resource management, control of the financial aspects, and the sales and marketing. So the operational risk is not only the involved with the operations. Right? The operations කියන එක අපි දන්නවනේ. Operations කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? Input එකක් තියෙනවා. Right? ඊට පස්සේ ඒක process එකකට දානවා. ඒක output එකක් කරනවා. Right? Input එක අපි material දානවා. ඊට පස්සේ process එක යනවා. ඊට පස්සේ finish good එකක් එනවා. Right? So ගොඩක් කට්ටිය හිතනවා මේක තමයි operation risk. මේකේ මොකක් හරි failure එකක් වුණොත් ඒක තමයි අපි operation risk කියලා කියන්නේ. Yes, that is also the operation risk. But not only that, right? Other areas of the business like financial aspects, marketing, sales, if you are having any kind of a failures in those processes as well, we categorize it as a operational risk. We categorize it as a operational risk. So let's see the scenario and let's identify what are the operational risks and what are the strategic risks, because that is very important in your examination. So we need to identify what are the operational risks we are having, what are the strategic risks we are having. We need to differentiate that. Then only we can provide the solutions, because when you are providing the solution for the strategic risk, right, basically it's a high level risk, so you need to address in a high level, right? But when it comes to operational risk, it's lower than the strategic risk. So when you are addressing that, we need to basically using the internal control measures, right? So let's look at the scenario. Scenario 1, right? This company is manufacturing an online retail of pre-prepared organic meals suitable for infants aged from 6 months to 3 years. Right? මේ organization එක මොකද්ද කරන්නේ? එතන මේ business එක කරන්නේ manufacture කරනවා and online retailing කරනවා. Right? Online බඩු විකුණනවා. Pre-prepared organic meals. Right? Pre-prepared organic meals for infants. පොඩි ළමයිටයි අවුරුදු 3 මාස 6 අතර පොඩි ළමයිට මේ organic foods හදන organic meal එකක් හදන එක තමයි මේගොල්ලෝ කරන්නේ මේ business එක. Right? Member of the finance team has written the following email to the senior financial manager. Right? One of the member in the finance team written an email to the senior financial manager. So senior financial manager may be a kind of a member of the board. Let's see. Right? To senior financial manager, right, from the Richards. That's the person who has sent that email. Team meeting notes. Good afternoon. The team and I had a brainstorming session this morning to identify the risk to which the organization may be susceptible. right? So you can see the brainstorming session. So we have discussed in the risk management process. So one of the way that we can identify the risk is brainstorming. So most of the organization using this, right? So this organization also using a brainstorming session, and they have identified different risks of the company. Although we have identified a number of risks that I have included in the meeting notes attachment, we were struggling to categorize them between the strategic risk and the operation risk. Right? The මං කිව්වා වගේ organizations වල තියෙන ප්‍රධාන ගැටලුවක් තමයි මේ identify කරගත්ත risk strategic risk ද operation risk ද කියලා categorize කරගන්න අමාරුකම. Right? හරියට තේරෙන්නේ නැති එක. එතකොට ඇයි එහෙම වෙන්නේ? මොකද අපි මේක හරියට categorize කරගත්තේ නැත්නම් අපි මේ risk address කරන විදිය වෙනවා. ඒතර අපි operation risk එක address කරන්නේ අපි internal control measures වලින්. strategic risk එක address කරන්නේ අපි board level එකේ strategic decisions වලින්. right. එතකොට අපි මේක හරියට categorize කරගත්තේ නැත්නම් සමහරවිට ඒක වැරදි විදියට company එකට බලපාන්න පුළුවන්. right. So therefore we need to identify the risk categories correctly. Right. So this person also having that issue. He can't, they are struggling to categorize the risk they have identified between the strategic risk and the operational risk. Please explain the difference between the two categories, right? And the attachment is there, right? Note of the finance team meeting, risk identification for the organization. The first one is risk of key personnel, right? Right? Risk of key personnel leaving the organization. Right. So can you tell me what is this risk? Is it an operational risk or the strategic risk? Risk of key personnel leaving the organization. Let's say the director is leaving, one of the director is leaving the organization. Is it a operational risk or the strategic risk? Yes.
Strategic risk.
Why?
Because it is nothing to attach with internal control measures.
More than that, if you elaborate why you are categorizing the strategic risk, how it's involved in the strategic things.
It can be impacted by a board decision, maybe
Yes.
remuneration.
Yes, it's a strategic risk. We can categorize it as a strategic risk. Why? Because we know the key persons are involving with the strategic decision making, right? So if one of them is leaving from the organization, that will impact to the company's strategic decisions. So it will create some strategic risks. Good. Right. So can you guys look these risks and categorize them? So I will number these ones. One is the strategic risk, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what you can do is you can write 1 strategic risk, 2 likewise, right? So try to write the answer by looking at these risks. Try to categorize the whether this risk is a strategic risk and operational risk. So I will give you 5 minutes. Right. Sorry, guys. Right. Yeah. For the second one, so what is the risk? Is it a strategic risk or the business risk? Risk of non-organic ingredient being used in the production process by untrained employees. Okay, the operation risk है, the strategic risk है. Yes. Are you there? So sorry for the late there, sir. Yeah. Prakash, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what is it a strategic risk or the operation risk? Yes. Risk of non-organic ingredients. So this is organic meal, right? Non-organic ingredient being used in the production process by untrained employees. So that is a but the operational risk, right? In the operations, that risk has been arise, right? The third one, risk that competitors cut cost by changing their manufacturing process, right? The competitors cut their cost. So if the competitors cut their cost, what will happen, right? So their product price will be goes down, right? Their product price is goes down. So that will impact it to the our business as well. So is it a operational risk or the strategic risk? Operational or strategic risk? Operational or strategic risk? Guys,
Strategic risk.
yes, strategic risk. Why? Because if the competitors are decreasing the prices, so we need to take some strategic risks, strategic decisions to go with that competition, right? So therefore, it's a strategic risk. Risk of thefts due to ineffective security measures, right? So that will be a operational risk. That is very easy, right? Risk of health and safety legislations in food handling, right? So that is also operational risk, right? Risk of new product line falling, right? So that is operational risk. Risk of changes to guidelines for feeding infants. So that is a kind of a strategic risk from the external environment. So now they are having some sort of different guidelines. That means they are saying that tree products, organic foods, we are not approving to provide to the infants, right? Right. So therefore, the company has to change their strategies, different approaches they need to follow when they are producing their goods, right? So that will be a strategic risk. Risk of loss of financial data due to inadequate backup system, right? So that is in the financial aspects, that is a kind of operational risk because of we don't have a proper what do you call the internal controls. So you are having the operational risk, right? Right. So now we can see the senior manager's response. No problem at all. Thank you for organizing the brainstorming session so promptly after your meeting. A strategic risk is the risk that organization or the business strategies will fail, right? මොකද්ද මේ strategic risk එක කියන්නේ? Strategic risk එක කියන්නේ company එක ගත්ත strategic decisions නැත්නම් strategic path එක fail වුණාම තමයි strategic risk එකක් generate වෙන්නේ, right? Strategies fail වුණාම strategic path එක fail වුණාම තමයි මේ strategic risk එකක් එන්නේ business එක. Sorry, right? So that is we call it as strategic risk. These risks tend to be fewer in number but are fundamental to the organization continuous existence in the longer term, right? එතකොට මේ strategic risk කියන එක වැඩිපුර આવුත් එහෙනම් මොකද වෙන්නේ? ඒක business එකට හොඳ නැහැ, right? Right. දැන් strategic risk කියන්නේ company එකට high level එකෙන් බලපාන risk. ඒවා ගොඩක් ඇති වුණොත් එහෙනම් business එක කරලා වැඩක් නැහැ. ඒ නිසා ගොඩක් වෙලාවල strategic risk පොඩ අඩුවෙන් තියෙන්නේ business වලට. හැබැයි ඒවා හරියට address කරේ නැත්නම් ඒක company එකේ long term existence එකට බලපානවා. Right? Right? It will impact to the long term existence of the company. Right? For example, one of our key strategies is selling high quality organic meals for the infant, right? So one main strategy of us is to provide the high quality organic meal. That is our strategy. That is our strategical objective. අපේ business එකේ strategical objective මොකද්ද? High quality organic product එකක් infant කෙනෙක්ට දෙන එක. So that is our key strategy. Because of this, a strategic risk we are exposed to is a change in the attitudes of the parent against ready prepared infants meals, right? එතකොට parents කියනවා කලින් හදපු මේ වගේ කෑමක් දෙන එක හොඳ නැහැ පොඩි ළමයිට. That is a kind of a risk that we are having. Strategic risk we are having. This would render us unable to meet our strategic objectives. Because of this incident, we can't reach our strategic objectives. What is our strategic objective? To provide a high quality organic meal to the infants. But the parents of the infants are not like to take this organic product. So that will create a strategic risk because we are unable to meet our strategic objectives. Of course, this is an external risk outside our control. So we know it's the thing which will happen outside of our control from external environment. So what we need to do, assess the probability of this event and implement the appropriate safeguards. Even though we can't control the external environment, right? What we can do is we can look at the probability of happening this event, and what we can do is implement the appropriate safeguards, right? For example, if the parents' thought process will be changed, so what we can do is we can produce another product to address their concerns, right? So likewise, we need to definitely identify that issue before that issue is arise. right? So that is why the risk management process is very important. That's why the risk identification is very important when it comes to strategic risk. Because in the strategic risk, if you are not identifying, it will impact to the organization objectives, strategic objectives. That means, if the businesses are not achieving the strategic objectives, what will happen? They can't continue their business, right? Right. Even though this type of risk is very limited, but the impact is very high if it is happen, right? Then when it's coming to, when compared to the strategic risk, the operation is like a kind of a lower level of risk than the strategic risk, because it's impacted to the business procedures, right? Operational risk represent the risk of loss resulting from failures in business procedures, people, or the systems. They tend to be risks from internal sources that affects a wider range of areas. They are higher in number and affect the company's day-to-day operations in the short term. The impact of each of these operational risks vary in significance. So we need to consider that along with the probability of its occurrence. For an example, if our IT system was subject to a cyber attack and confidential customer payment was stolen, this would constitute as an operational risk with significant impact. Even as an isolated incident, it would have a hugely adverse effects on our organization, right? So you can see, when there is an operational risk, what we need to do is we need to look at the probability and the occurrence, right? Which we have discussed last week also, right? Based on that, we need to identify what is the level of this operational risk, right? Right. Conversely, the operational risk of machine breakdown is unlikely to have a significant impact in isolation. However, if several of our machines have the same fault, this would have a greater impact, right? දැන් අපි ගත්තොත් එම operational risk අපිට categorize කරනවා එක එක විදිහට. සමහරවිට operational risk එක high risk එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට IT system එකේ breakdown එකක්. නැත්නම් system එකට cyber attack එකක් ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. right? එතකොට මේ risk එක නිසා අපිට adverse huge adverse දේවල් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට ඒකේ impact එක වැඩි. හැබැයි තව ඔපරේෂන් රිස්ක් එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් අපේ කම්පැනි එකේ මැෂින් එකක් බ්‍රේක් ඩවුන් වෙන එක. right? කම්පැනි එකේ මැෂින් එකක් බ්‍රේක් ඩවුන් එක. ඒකෙන් ලොකු ඉම්පැක්ට් එකක් නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. right? ලොකු ඉම්පැක්ට් එකක් නැති වෙන්න. හැබැයි මැෂින්ස් දෙක තුනක් බ්‍රේක් ඩවුන් වුණොත් ඒ ඉම්පැක්ට් එක වැඩි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. right? ඒ ඉම්පැක්ට් එක වැඩි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. right? I hope that has given you more insights into categorization process. I will work through your meeting notes and contact you if I have any questions, right? So that is the reply mail by the finance director, right? Finance manager to that person, right? So you can now, I think you are having an idea that what is the meaning of the strategic risk, what is the meaning of the operational risk, and how we are categorize these two types of risks, right? When you are having the question in an examination, so you are able to categorize those risks. And also when it comes to your assignments, right? So when you are reviewing the ERM system of the company, right? So they will mention different risks. So based on this risk, you need to categorize what are the strategic risks, what are the operational risks, and what are the overall business risks the companies have. Right. 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 Any questions regarding that? Yes. So when you are looking at the conclusion, what we have discussed till now, when identifying and evaluating the risk, consideration should be given to both downside and upside risk. This approach allows the possible adverse outcomes or threats to be predicted and controlled while identifying the possibility of favorable outcomes and taking advantages of potential opportunities. So that we have discussed the downside risk and the upside risk. So if it is upside risk, we need to look at the possibility of favorable outcomes, right? And through that, taking the advantages of potential opportunities. When it's come to downside risk, we need to look at what are the threats, adverse outcomes we have. Right? The risk කිව්වොත් එම risk එක දෙකට බෙදන්න පුළුවන්. Downside risk එකයි upside risk එකයි. right? අපි කතා කරා risk management. Upside risk එක කියන්නේ risk එක through අපිට opportunity එකක් create කරන්න පුළුවන්ද කියලා බලන්න ඕනේ. මොන හරි outcome එකක් තියෙනවද? advantage එකක් තියෙනවද? right? ඒතකොට downside risk කියන්නේ මේ risk එක නිසා අපිට adverse outcomes මොනවද තියෙන්නේ? මොනවද threats තියෙන්නේ? මොනවද අපිට තියෙන threats අපි කොහොමද මේවා control කරන්නේ? කොහොමද මේවා predict කරන්නේ? So that we call it as upside risk and downside risk. Another useful categorization is to look internal and external risks. Internal risks are the risks that are inherent in various activities that the organization perform from the staff, process, money, and so on. External risks are coming from the competitors, that means government, financial environment. Right. Right. So we are having few categories. One is upside risk, downside risk. We have discussed it last week, external risk and internal risk. So today we have discussed the yet another useful perspective in the categorization of various risks as either strategic or the operations, right? So this categorization is the strategic risk and operational risk. This view look more towards the interaction between the part of the business and how it's interact with the issues externally. After the strategic or operational risks are categorized, an analysis can be carried out to determine the probability of occurrence and the impact to the organization. Right. Right. If you are categorize the risk as risk, strategic risk and the operational risk, so what you have to look at? Sorry, you need to look at the probability of occurrence. Right. Probability of occurrence. මේ risk එක සිද්ධ වෙන්න තියෙන probability එක. occur වෙන්න පුළුවන් probability එක කොච්චරද? And if it is happen, what is the impact to the organization? If it is happen, what is the impact to the organization? So based on that, we need to give some values to this different risks. Analyzing the different risks that an organization faces relating back to the overall enterprise risk management process. It is a key starting point because a risk must be identified before the organization can respond, right? So in the ERM system, so what is the important part is identification of the risk, right? After establishing the context, definitely you need to identify what are the risks in this context. Then only you can respond. Therefore, there needs to be a good tone at the top of the organization and suitable directors, employees, and even the external consultant involved in the finding the risk. Right? එතකොට මේ risk එක identification part එකේදී වැදගත් වෙන එක දෙයක් තමයි tone at the top. කියන්නේ අපේ ඉන්න director board එකේ tone එක. ඒගොල්ලෝ risk එක risk එක ගැන can you mute your microphone? Okay. Right. So tone at the top means, right? So director's perspective regarding the risk. So they are having a kind of a favorable tone at the top of the directors. So then it will help to identify the risk correctly. And also the working force of the organization, like directors, employees, and the external consultants like auditors, right? If they are all are capable enough, they all are suitable to find out the risk. It's very important to identify the risk on time, right? If they use these methods to help identify the risk, they have better chance to discover all the relevant risks and then consider how to deal with them, right? Right. Then after identification part, right, what we have to do is we need to evaluate the risks, right? Once risks have been identified, an organization is positioned to evaluate and quantify the risk, right? You need to evaluate the risk and quantify the risk. So as I mentioned you before, if you can quantify the risk, that is very important, right? If there's any possibility that we can quantify the risk, right, that means we can give the values to the risk which we have identified. That is very important to address the sort of risk, However, it isn't possible or worthwhile to act on every risk that may occur. The time and the cost doing this is not sensible. Right? Right? සමහර වෙලාවට අපිට රිස්ක් එක ආවට අපිට රිස්ක් එක quantify කරගන්න බැරි වෙනවා. Right? සමහරවිට අපේ time එකයි cost එකයි යනවා business එකේ අපි quantify කරන්න යන්නේ නැහැ. හැබැයි පුළුවන් තරම් අපි try කරන්න ඕන. අපිට possibility එකක් තියෙනවා නම් අපිට හම්බෙලා තියෙන risk එක quantify කරගන්න. risk එකට යම්කිසි value එකක් දෙන්න. අපිට දැන් value එකක් දුන්නොත් දෙන්න අපි ගැන එක ගැන තීරණයක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. Right? දැන් මොන හරි දෙයක් ගැන value එකක් දුන්නොත් තමයි අපිට තීරණයක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. Right? දැන් ඔයාලට opportunity cost එකක් ආවොත් මොකද්ද කරන්නේ? දැන් ඔයාලට opportunity cost එකක් කරනවා SAP එකේ declare කරනවා නැත්නම් ඔයාලා පිටරට යනවා. Right? So now then you need to give some values to these two opportunities. If I'm doing this SAP degree, so these are the benefits I'm receiving. These are the value of benefits. If I'm going abroad, these are the benefits I'm receiving. So you need to compare that. Right? Otherwise, if you're not quantify that, you can't decide. Right? What is the best option? Right? Right. Even you are having two girlfriends also, what you have to do? You need to quantify them. Right? What is the most beneficial option? So then only you need to choose. And if you are identifying the risk management correctly. Right? Right. The most less riskier option and the most beneficial option you need to take. Right. So that is why we are evaluating risk. That is why we need to give value to the risk or quantify the risk. Right. Right. So both the likelihood and the impact of the risk are considered during the evaluation process. So mainly how we are going to give the values to the risk, we are looking at the two things. One is likelihood and the impact. Right. Some risks may have both minimal likelihood of occurring, and if they do, the impact would be kind of a less. It's a minimum. Some risks may have large impact but are unlikely. Right? Large impact is there, but it's not regularly happening. For an example, there could be an unexpected war which would have disastrous effects of the instance. However, this is very unlikely, and it would be hard for most business to do anything that would affect this. Right? For example, I'm going to expand my business to, let's say, in Israel, right? So we are not. There's a kind of a possibility that war can be begun, but highly unlikely, right? But suddenly it happened. What will happen? It will create some big risk. Therefore, it is necessary to evaluate the likelihood and the impact of the risk that the businesses face and make decisions based upon the rankings. Right? So you need to rank the risk, right? When you're evaluating the ERM system in a different companies in your assignment, you can see they have ranked the risk, right? They have ranked the risk using different approaches. To make good decision about the risk that an organization faces, it is necessary to first to evaluate the impact of the risk. It is also then necessary to quantify the likelihood of the risk. Finally, armed with that information, the organization need to weight up the risk and make the decision on what to do. The organization need to have a means of comparing the impact and likelihood of the risk. Right? To achieve this, there are some techniques that you can position the risk. You can quantify the likelihood and the impact. Right? So these are some techniques we can use. Right? Now, what are the ඊළඟ ප්‍රශ්න තමයි කොහොමද අපි මේ likelihood එක decide කරන්නේ? කොහොමද අපි මේ impact එක decide කරන්නේ? Right? So there are some techniques. The one is qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis means what? You can ask from experts. Right? So, for example, we are having this kind of a risk. We have identified this kind of a risk. So, what is your rating? What is your judgment? Right? You can ask from the experts. Right? Right? When it comes to auditing also, it's a qualitative approach. Right? What auditors are doing? They are providing qualitative opinion. Based on the information they gather, they are telling that the financial statements are free from material misstatements based on their judgment. So likewise, the risk identification or the risk ranking also we can do using the qualitative approach. Qualitative analysis. We can ask from the consultant or ask from the experts, what is your judgment related to this risk? We have identified this risk. We are our machinery having some sort of trouble during last week. So, what is your judgment related to this risk? You can ask. That we call it as qualitative analysis. That is a one technique which I can use to rank the risk. To rank the risk. Then the quantitative analysis. That means using the numbers. Using numbers to improve this process, having numbers to see the size of the risk and the probability of risk means that better decisions can be made. There may be even be some correlation between risk. One risk may occur when other one does. So the total effects can be considered. So you can use the quantitative analysis. That means using the quantifiable information, you can give the values to the risk. Right? That is very difficult task. But there are some statistical techniques we can use. Right? Right? In your fourth year, if you are doing the research, right? So you can identify these statistical techniques. If you are following up the research methodology subject, I think you are not yet follow it, right? So under that, we will discuss these statistical options, which we can quantify the statements. Right? For example, දැන් අපි කියන organization performance කියන statement එක. Organization performance කියන statement එක බලන්නේ කොහොමද? ROA එකෙන්. Return on asset එකෙන් අපි measure කරනවා. Company එකේ performance. Likewise, right? For the numbers, for the wordings, you can give values, right? How we can decide the independent dependent for the quantification? How? For the independent, we can take it as 1. Non-independent, we can say 0. We are providing the values. Then we can compare. Right? අපිට numbers දුන්නොත් ඉතින් අකුරු compare කරන්න පුළුවන්. Independent dependent කියන එක statement දෙකක්. ඒක අපි compare කරන්න පුළුවන් කොහොමද? අපි ඒකට value එකක් දෙන්න ඕනේ. අපි independent 1 කියලා හිතනවා. Non-independent 0 කියලා හිතනවා. Then we can compare. Right? Then only we can compare. Likewise, we can give values. We have different techniques to quantify the values. Right? Then risk mapping, showing the overall effects of all the main risks to organization. Risk mapping illustrates the overall relationship between risk and help to decide what to do. Right? Right. Then the risk identification and initial evaluation. The first stage in the risk management is being aware of the risk. A risk can be successfully managed only if the organization is aware of its existence, understand a sufficient detail regarding the risk. So I have told you, right? If you are not identifying the risk, that is the biggest risk you are having. Right? So therefore, the first stage of the risk management is to identify the risk. To identify the risk, you need to aware about the risk as a business. Right? Risk identification should be a continuous process. Identifying a risk before it occurs make it much more likely that the organization will be better prepared to deal with its consequences. Organizations that can identify and assess the risk in advance can put appropriate risk mitigating controls in place to protect the organization should the risk event occur. When top-level management is asked to identify the risk that is believed that the organization face, it is often referred to as top-down risk identification, right? When frontline managers supervise and the other employees are asked to identify the risk that the organization face, it refers as bottom-up risk management, right? Right. Right. Risk identification අපිට categorize දෙකකට වෙන් කරන්න පුළුවන්. එකක් තමයි top level එකේ involve වෙලා ඉන්නවා risk identification part එකෙන් අපි කියනවා top down approach එක. Bottom level එක company එකේ risk identification එකත් එක්ක involve වෙලා දිනනවා නම් අපි කියනවා bottom up risk identification approach. Right. So once the risk identified, the impact can be evaluated to make the biggest impact. Mitigate in best ways for the given risk. Allocate the resources in most appropriate way to get the best effects of the money incurred. Right. රිස්ක් එක අයිඩෙන්ටිෆයි කරගත්තට පස්සේ මොකද්ද කරන්න ඕනේ? අපි බලන්න ඕනේ අපිට මොකද්ද වැඩිපුරම ඉම්පැක්ට් වෙන්නේ. මොනවද අපේ අපි යොදා ගන්න ක්‍රමෝපායන් මේ රිස්ක් එක මිටිගේට් කරන්න. සහ අපි කොහොමද අපේ රිසෝසස් ඇලොකේට් කරන්නේ අපිට වඩාත් හොඳ අවුට්කම් එකක් එන විදියට. බෙස්ට් අවුට්කම් එකක් එන විදියට අපි වේදම් කරපු ගාන. right. 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 So let's look at the qualitative analysis first. An initial response to the risk faced is to judge them in a qualitative manner. Qualitative කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? Qualitative කියන්නේ ඔයාගේ judgment එක. දැන් based on the experience, right? මේ qualitative judgment එක වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? දැන් ඔයා අවුරුදු 20ක් විතර එක තැන වැඩ කරද්දී ඔයාට හම්බ වෙන qualitative judgment එක වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන් අද වැඩට ආපු එක්කෙනත් එක්ක බලන්න. Right? දැන් මම අද lecturing කරන දේ වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන් තව අවුරුදු මං ජීවත් වෙලා හිටියොත් තව අවුරුදු 30කින් විතර lectures කරද්දී. Right? වයසට ගිහිල්ලා. Right? So that is a qualitative approach because of the judgment. Well, because of your knowledge, the qualitative manner can be changed. This means that no financial analysis is performed. There's no numbers, but the risks are judged on their perceived qualities. This relies on the people that are involved in the process. As above, top-level directors and managers are likely to be involved, but frontline staff may also be involved. Their perception of the risk may be different, and especially for some frontline staff, the knowledge of all the risks may be lacking. Right? දැන් මම මේකට උදාහරණයක් කියන්නම් ඔඩිටින් වලදී අපිට තියෙන ඔඩිට් රිස්ක් එක. ඔඩිට් එකක් කරද්දී අපිට තියෙනවා ඔඩිට් රිස්ක් එක. මොකක්ද ඔඩිට් රිස්ක් එක? ඔඩිට් රිස්ක් එක කියන්නේ ෆයිනෑන්ෂල් ස්ටේට්මන්ට් එක වැරදි වංචාවල් තියෙද්දී අපි කියනවා ෆයිනෑන්ෂල් ස්ටේට්මන්ට් එක වල වංචාවල් නැහැ කියලා. Right. Right. What is the audit risk? When there is a inappropriate, when there is a fraud and error in the financial statements, we are providing our opinion as a good opinion. That means we are providing an inappropriate opinion. That is the audit risk, right? So when it comes to partners, right? Partners has to decide the material level. Audit කරන්නේ audit partners තමයි මේ companies වල material level එක decide කරන්න ඕනේ. නැත්නම් අපි තමයි decide කරන්නේ. Ground level එකක් දෙනවා decide කරන්න. හැබැයි partner එක approve කරන්න. Right. So by experience, partner knows what is the material level of this business because it's a qualitative thing. Right? He knows when it comes to this company, it's better to go with this kind of material level because of his experience. Right? Because of his experience. So therefore, qualitative analysis is the kind of a perception thing. Right? Especially for some frontline staff, the knowledge of all risk may be lacking. So it will be difficult for them to make comparison between the risk they know about the other risks. So therefore, the qualitative analysis involves more experience and the more knowledge. Right? Qualitative analysis makes a judgment of the risk based in the relative quick and simple way. Initially, it is used as a screening of the risk to get the idea of prioritize that are like to be faced. It is probable that once the qualitative analysis is performed, then qualitative analysis follows to give better assurance on what to do. In its simple form, risks are first brainstormed to identify what the organization may face. Then the risks are ranked according to the very low risk, medium risk, high risk, and major risk. Decision on what to do about the risk can be then be made. However, this approach is open to bias and may suffer from lack of information. It is also hard to justify using a quantitative approach. Right? Qualitative approach එක අපි මොකද මුලින්ම කරන්නේ මොකද්ද? brainstorming එකක් කරලා අපි හොයාගන්නවා මොනවද company එකේ risk කියලා. ඊට පස්සේ අපේ තියෙන ජජ්මන්ට් එක, අපේ තියෙන knowledge එක, අපේ තියෙන experience එක අපි මේව rank කරනවා. right? අපිට තියෙන risk මේ risk low risk එක, මේ risk high risk එක. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට මම කියනවා මගේ company එකට competitor risk එක high risk එක. Operation risk එක අවුලක් නැහැ. මට shape එකේ manage කර ගන්න පුළුවන්. It's a medium risk. Based on my judgment, there's no quantification. But based on my knowledge, I will tell this risk is low risk, risk is high risk, right? So there are, if you are following the judgment, definitely the bias can be there. Bias will be there, right? Abhi judgment වලට යද්දි bias තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, right? උදාහරණයක් විදිහට ඔයාගේ යාළුවෙක් අහනවා ගෑනු ළමයි දෙන්නෙක් පෙන්නලා මේ ගෑනු ළමයි දෙන්නයි හොඳ කවුද කියලා, right? මේ යාළුවගෙන් තමයි අහන්නේ judgment එක, right? එතන මොකද කරන්නේ යාළුවෝ? එයාගේ එක්ස්පීරියන්ස් එකයි එයාගේ නොලෙජ් එක යූස් කරලා එයා කියනවා මේ ගෑනු ළමයි තමයි හොඳ. හැබැයි එයාගේ එක්ස්පීරියන්ස් එක නොලෙජ් එකයි සමහරට වරදින්න පුළුවන්. බයස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. right? Bias වෙන්න පුළුවන්. So likewise when you are using the qualitative approach, when you are analyzing the risk, so that some bias will be there, right? If you don't have much information, this bias can be arise. Information සුත් අඩුයි නම් අනිවාර්යෙන් මේ bias එන්න පුළුවන්. It is also harder to justify that using a qualitative approach. To improve the qualitative approach, taken the risk can be given a rating by looking at the following. Right? The perceived probability of the risk, giving a score 1 to 10. The size of the impact of the risk on the organization, scoring 1 for low and impact to 10 for very high impact. The overall score for the risk schedule out of 100, meaning that risk can be compared and decision made on associate that follows. Right? This approach appears more scientific, but it is very reliant on the judgment of the people giving the rate. Right? Right. Right. So let's check your knowledge. Right. So any questions up to now? Any questions? Guys, any questions? Are you guys there or you are looking at David Inimo or something? Or eating or sleeping? What you're doing? Yes, any questions? Right. Seems like you don't have any questions. Right.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I
Go
have
ahead.
a question regarding our group assignment.
Okay.
Sir, is it okay to do solely? There is a statement mentioned. Please explain risk mitigation for small bakery. Is it okay to give a common example regarding that bakery, or we can do only risk mitigation activities for our selected company?
No. That's in that assignment thing. I just provide an example only, right? For that bakery thing is an example, right? So what you have to do is you need to relate it to your organization.
Okay, sir.
Right?
Only
So
for
what,
our organization.
yeah. Right? So what you have to do is you need to choose an organization. That means you need to choose a company, right? From the Colombo Stock Exchange. So everything you need to relate to that company, right? So I use the examples like restaurant and other things to just elaborate what you have to do, right?
Okay, sir. Got it.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Right. Any other questions? Right. So let's go to this question. Martha Sue is a manufacturing business that produces covers for smartphones. Its directors have been looking forward to judging the risk that the business will face over the next year. You have been asked to give your opinion on following risks. Which risk is like to have the largest impact but the smallest likelihood? Right? The first one, a machine in a factory catches fire and halt the production for the next week. A nearby nuclear power plant explodes and severely affects the production and sales. A new competitor enters the market with a new attractive feature. Employees go on strike and get 5% pay rise. Right, right, right. So based on your judgment, qualitative approach, what is the most impactful uh, risk and what is the lowest one? So if you categorize like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So tell me, what is the most impactful one? What's the number one? If you categorize these risks based on your qualitative knowledge, based on your knowledge and experience, the qualitative way. So what is their business? They are manufacturing covers for the smartphones. Right? Yes. What is the highest risk? A, B, C, or D? Based on your judgment. Yes.
A new competitor enters the market with a new attractive feature.
So you say that is the first one. Okay. Yes. Any other opinion other than that? Yes. Yes. Others? So then what is the second one? Yeah. So firstly, what we have to do is we need to identify the strategic risk and the operational risk here, right? So basically, as per my judgment, right, all these three things are operational risks, right? Right. Only this one is a strategic risk, right? So when you are following the qualitative approach, according to the knowledge we have gathered, so we know if the strategic risk is arise and it goes beyond the appropriate level, it will impact on the strategic objectives of the company. So therefore, the most severe impactful risk can be this one. Yes. A new competitor enter the market with a new attractive feature. Right? Why? Because when it's come to the operational risk, like machine in the factory catches the fire, right? And it will only hold the business for the next week. So that is a kind of operational risk that we can clear, right? It's the impact is very low and the likelihood also very low, right? But here the impact and the likelihood can be very high, right? A new competitor enter the market. The market is open. Any time the new competitor can come, right? And the impact also very high, right? And a nearby nuclear power plant කියපු ගමන් අපි අපේ ළමයි හිතනවා මේක තමයි ලොකුම රිස්ක් එක. නියුක්ලියර් කියන වචන ලොකුයි. right? But it will affect what? Severely affect the production and sales. More than this, this will impact the companies kind of in a higher range. So we can categorize it as two. Second one, employees go on strike and get 5% raise. Right. So this is the last one, I think. This is the third. Right. Right. Because already it has been solved. Right. Only the impact is it will increase the cost. of the production. The fourth one, right? So therefore, the first one is the C, second one is second one is the B, and the third one is A, and the last one is 4, based on my judgment. Right? If you can prove it in a different way, sometimes the answer can be changed. Right? But you have to prove it. Right? You have to tell the reason. Right? So in your examination also, if something like this is given and we are asking the qualitative analysis, so what you have to do is you need to prove it. So when you are writing it, the biggest risk is a new competitor enter the market. What you have to do is write this. So you need to write it as this is a strategic risk because it will impact on the strategic objective of the company, right? And also the likelihood is very high because in time the computer can come to the business and the impact also very high. If someone is coming to the business, then that will be impact to the profitability of the company, right? So that is why I categorize this as a number one ranking issue or the most impactful risks that this company is facing, right? So likewise, you need to write the answer. You need to rationalize, right? Right. So when it's come to the quantifying the likelihood of the risk, so I'm not going to discuss this because it's more involving with the statistical ways, right? What we can do is how we can quantify the risk is using the expected value, correlation, regression, sensitivity analysis. So those are involved with the statistical approaches. So therefore, in your syllabus, I'm not going to discuss this, how to quantify the likelihood of the risk. Right? Basically, it will discuss in your research methodology when you are doing the research. Right? Right? So therefore, I'm not going to discuss here. Right? It's expected value, standard deviation, normal distribution, correlation, regression, sensitivity analysis. Based on this, we can quantify the risk. Right? Right. So then, when it comes to risk, right? Since we are financial people, when we are management people, right? The most of the time we are involved with the financial risks, right? Right. අපි ගොඩක් කලාට financial sector වැඩ කරන්නේ, right? දැන් අපි ඔයගොල්ලෝ financial individuals ලා වෙන්න ඉගෙන ගන්න. එතකොට financial risk එකත් එක්ක තමයි වැඩ කරන්නේ. එතකොට මොන වගේ financial risk ද අපි company එකක තියෙන්නේ, right? Right. Financial risk is a threat to future profit or future cash flows as a result of change to the following. Foreign exchange rate risk. We call it as foreign exchange rate risk. Interest rate risk. Customer risk or bad debt risk. Political risk. Financial impact of the capital structure, gearing risk. Right. Financial risk can represent a major threats to an organization, particularly if the impact is significant and was not anticipated and consequently not hedged. Right? Right. And financial risk කියන එක අපිට quantify කරන්න lazy. Right? මේවා වුණාට පස්සේ ඒකේ impact එකත් significant. ඒ වගේම අපි hedge කරලා නැත්නම්, right? Hedge techniques use කරලා නැත්නම් මේ financial risk වලින් එන impact එක it's very high. Right. So now we are going to look at this financial risk when the companies are exposing to the financial risk. Right. Right. Okay. So before discussing this, let's have a 5 minutes break. So then we will start, right, at 9:38. Okay. Right. So when it comes to Sri Lankan companies, this foreign exchange risk is actually highly impactful sort of risk, right? Because because of the economic decisions and the political uncertainties, this exchange rate is changing kind of in a rapid phase, right? For example, in 2021, right, the dollar rate is there in 150 or something, right? But it's goes up to 400 sort of thing in last few years, but now it's coming down to 300. But so so likewise, when it's come to the business also, this foreign exchange variation or the foreign exchange volatility is impact in a kind of a huge way, right? Foreign exchange risk is a threat to future profit or cash flows arising as a result of currency volatility. An example of one of the most significant example of currency volatility in recent years was the collapse of the Icelandic economy. The Icelandic currency fell up approximately 45 in one day. The same thing happened to Sri Lanka, right? So suddenly the Sri Lankan rupee value dropped to, I think, 150 to 400, right? So that is a huge drop, right? Right, huge drop. So it will impact on the business, future profits, right? And also the interest rate, the same thing because of the financial volatility, the interest rate also very big risk to the businesses, right? So that suddenly in Sri Lanka, what happened to the interest rate, right? The interest rate goes up to 30% or something, right? So when it comes to the loan rates, it goes up 30%, right? So people don't have, because people are keeping their money, right? So therefore, government wants to get the money back. So therefore, their saving rates has been increased to 30% or something. So people are investing the money in the banks, right? But when it's come to banks, what will happen? So they have given the loans in the 12 to 15 rates, but they have to pay 30% interest rate for the fixed deposits, right? So there will be an interest rate risk. Interest rate risk is the threat to future profit or cash flows as a result of volatility in the interest rates. Following the financial crisis that unfolded over 2008 to 10 period, interest rates were reduced in the major developed economies to all-time low in attempt to stimulate the world economy. Right, right. And the credit risk, right? Credit risk is the threat to future profit and the cash flow as well. Customers are unable to pay amounts to the required amounts to the organization, right? That will be the credit risk, right? Most of the Sri Lankan banks also facing this credit risk because people in Sri Lanka, they don't have money to pay the bank loans and all, right? So when you're looking at the credit card balances of most of the Sri Lankans, there are so many balances are there, right? Credit card balances නැති මිනිස්සෙක් නැති තරම් ලංකාවේ. Why? Because of this financial issues. The credit risk is there, right? Political risk. All these risks are there in Sri Lanka actually, right? Political risk, the political uncertainty is there because what the political people are doing, they are playing a major role. Why? They are taking the strategic decisions of the economy, right? So if they are taking the strategic decision of the economy, what will happen? It will impact to the companies as well because companies represent the economy, right? So if the political decisions are making significant changes, the volatility of the company's decision, the political decisions can be impact to the organization. For example, when it comes to Sri Lanka, the corporate tax rates, right? So in Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime, right, the corporate tax rate is 14% for the SMEs, only 14% for the SMEs. But suddenly, because the because Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka is having a, so don't worry about these sort of sounds, right? Because when we are doing the online sessions, we are having some kind of mistakes, right? How they hook you, right? Right. So what I'm discussing here is, so when it comes to tax rates, in the Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime, the 14% is for the SMEs. But suddenly, because of the economic recession and the government don't have the money, right? Actually, they don't have the rupees also at that time. So what they have done, they have increased the tax rates. So SME tax rates goes up to 30%, right? The previously SMEs are paying only 14%, but suddenly they have to pay 30%. So what will happen? කලින් ඒගොල්ලෝ රුපියල් 100ක් earn කරා නම් tax විදියට ගෙවි රුපියල් 14යි. හැබැයි දැන් ඒගොල්ලෝ 100ක් earn කරොත් රුපියල් 30ක් tax විදියට ගෙවන්න ඕනේ. So now the businesses have to change their approaches because of this political risk. Right? Political risk, political uncertainties. Most of the time the political risk can be arise because of the political uncertainties. Why? Because when the political uncertainty is there, the political decisions will be different. The wavy, the volatility is there, right? So therefore, these risks can be arise. And the financial impact of the capital structure. So we know the capital structure is a gearing, right? Gearing means what? How we can finance our company using equity finance or debt finance, right? So that is we call it as gearing, right? So if you are learn about the corporate finance, right? The most beneficial financing way is the debt financing. Why? ඇයි අපි කියන්නේ financing වලින් beneficial financing method එක debt financing කියලා? What's the reason?
Because most of the time the cost of capital is fixed. The interest rates are fixed.
Yeah. Yes, any other reason? It's not related to the risk manager, but it's related to the corporate finance. Yes.
Loan interest is tax free.
Loan interest is tax free because of the tax benefit. Yes, that is also a reason, yeah. Yes, one is the tax shield, right? Because tax free for the interest, the tax free is there, right? And also, if you are having the debt financing, that means you can retain your ownership, right? If you are going for the equity financing, you need to give the ownership as well, right? Right. So if you are going to use the debt financing, you can retain the ownership as well, ownership control, right? Right. And also when it's come to the cost, right? Debt financing is less costly than the equity finance, because if you want to go to the equity finance, so you need to register under the Colombo Stock Exchange, you need to have the constitutions, you need to issue the what you call the different documents, right? So the process is very difficult. But when it's from debt financing, it's less costly than the what do you call the equity finance, right? So such kind of reasons are there. The people are saying that debt financing, not the people, the corporate governance concepts are proving that the debt financing is more beneficial than the equity finance. So gearing risk is that, right? How we are going to design our capital structure, right? Capital structure. Right? So those are some financial risks we are having, right? Then the risk map, right? This is also very important in your assignment. You need to identify the risk map of your particular company, the selected company. Risk map also referred to as heat map. We can say heat map as well. Are useful to demonstrate the ranking of the risk that an organization faces. Numerical analysis is important to perform so that the risks have been shown more precisely than in qualitative analysis. In the qualitative analysis, we are just saying this is a high risk, this is a low risk, and this is medium risk. But when it comes to the risk map, right, it shows in a numerical way how does risk do do need to be assessed relative to each other and need to present to others so that they can understand the risk position of the organization. Risk maps are an effective way to achieve this because they show the risk graphically and allow other stakeholders such as shareholders to understand the current risk position the organization faces. The process of risk mapping involves the arrangement of categorization of risk depending on the potential risk impact, risk events, high, medium, or low, and the probability of risk event occurring, impact and occurring, right? There are other factors that may influence where exactly a risk is mapped, right? This includes consideration of following items: the strategic importance of the item to which the risk relates, the interrelationship with other risks, right? අපි දැන් risk map එක අනුව categorize කරද්දී අපි මේ considerations බලන්න ඕනේ. අපි මුලින් බලන්න ඕනේ මේක strategic risk එකක්ද කියලා. ඊට පස්සේ බලන්න ඕනේ මේ risk එක අනික් risk එක interrelated ද කියලා. Interrelationship එක මේ risk එක නිසා තව risk එකක් ඇති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. And direct and indirect consequences of the risk, right? Right? The direct and indirect consequences of the risk, the competitive and regulatory environment, right? And the complexity and the cost of risk mitigating controls, right? So based on this consideration only, we need to decide what is the position of we have the identified risk. It is important to note that the risk map is not an assurance map. It's not an assurance map, which is a different process and is subsequent to risk mapping. They are related to each other, but they are not the same, right? Use of a risk map. A risk map serves several useful purposes, including the following: ensure that the board of directors is regularly informed of current and emerging risks. Ensure that all directors know appropriate risk mitigating control must be in place. Facilitating prioritization of the risk. Ensure the organization resources are appropriately deployed. Provide the boards with evidence that risk is being managed. Provide an indication of which primary risk mitigation control should be considered to ensure that unnecessary risks are avoided, right? So this is the use of risk map, right? In your examination, the examiner can be asked, what are the use of risk map, right? So these are the use of risk map, right? So when it comes to risk map, there are different types of risk maps. The one is basic risk map. We call it as 2 to 2 1, right? So there we are having two things: probability and the impact. Probability and the impact, right? Here what we are following is a TARA framework, right? TARA framework, right? What do you mean by the TARA framework, right? If your impact is low and the probability is low, right, you are accepting, right? You are accepting, right? Risk එකේ probability එක ගැන වෙන්න තියෙන හැකියාවත් low, impact එකත් low, right? Right? වෙන්න තියෙන හැකියාවත් low, impact එකත් low. එහෙනම් අපි මොකද්ද? ඒ risk එක අපි accept කරනවා, right? If the impact is high but the probability is low, right? Impact එක high, right? සිද්ධ වුණොත් impact එක high, හැබැයි probability එක low, right? So we can transfer by ensuring, right? දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට SAP එකේ building එක කඩන් වැටෙන්න පුළුවන් probability එක අඩුයි. right? වෙන්නේ නැහනේ, right? වෙන්නේම නැහැ, right? එහෙම වෙන්නේ නැහැ, right? හැබැයි වෙන්නත් නොවෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. වෙන්නත් පුළුවන් නොවෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. There's a kind of a low probability, but if it is happen, what will happen? The impact is high. So what we can do? We can insure that building. We are transferring. Then impact is low, but the probability is high. Impact is low, but the probability is high. හැම වෙලෙම මේක සිද්ධ වෙනවා. අපේ මැෂින් එක break down වෙනවා හැම වෙලෙම. හැබැයි impact එක අඩුයි. මැෂින් එක හදාගෙන අපි කරගෙන යනවා. So what we can do? We can reduce it. Right? We can get a new machine, or we can repair the machine. Right? We can reduce. Right? And the last one, impact is high, and the probability is high. Impact එකත් high, probability high. එහෙනම් මොකද්ද? අපි avoid වෙනවා. right? අපි අයින් වෙලා ඉන්නවා. avoid කරනවා. So that is we call it as TARA framework. Right? TARA framework. Right? Avoid. For example, if you are going to invest in a company in Israel, you know the risk is high and the impact is high. The probability is high. So we are not going to invest. Avoid. Right? So that is the first basic risk map. And then we can have 5 to 5 heat map. Right? Most of the Sri Lankan companies are using this heat map. Right? Using this heat map. Right? In there, what we are doing is we are looking at the impact and the probability. Right? Impact and the probability. And we are categorizing this probability into 5 major categories. For example, probability 1 is rare, probability 2 unlikely, likely, highly likely, virtually certain. And also the impact we are categorizing into 5: severe, major, moderate, minor, insignificant. Right? Insignificant. Right? So based on that, we are mapping our risk. We call it as heat map. And also we can use the risk bands. Right? Right? Risk bands. In there, what we can do is, so if the probability and the impact is low, we call it as it's not material. We don't want to consider at right. Risk එක ඇත්තටම නෑ, probability එකකුත් නෑ, impact එකත් අඩුයි. එතන අපි වැඩි ගණන් ගන්න ඕනේ නෑ, no materiality is there. But the probability is moderate and the impact is moderate. What we have to do, we need to manage the risk. Right? We need to manage the risk. And probability is high and the impact is high. What we can do, we need to prioritize the risk, and based on that, we need to mitigate the control by reducing the probability and reducing the impact. Right? We need to have the mitigating strategies if the probability and the impact is high. So that we call it as risk band. Right? Each level of risk we need to identify and we need to propose the strategies. Right? We need to propose the strategies. Right? Right. So that's what we have to discuss regarding this area, right? So if I show you a risk map in John Kill's holding, I have already, I think, show you this. So when you are doing the assignment, right? So you need to refer this, right? So you can see in the John Kill's holding, right? So they are using the heat map, right? Under the risk map, they are using the heat map. So you can see they are using the risk rating matrix. So therefore, by the using the score, they have rate the risk, right? If the score is 1 to 2 insignificant, 3 to 6 low, 7 to 9 medium, 10 to 12 high, and 13 to 25 ultra high. So when you are looking at the risk, so you can see, so they have categorized based on that risk rating, right? Risk rating, and they have categorized the risk in a different ways. But what you have to do is you need to identify what are the strategic risk and the operational risks, right? They have only recognized the business risk as a whole, right? Right. In your assignment, you need to divide this into 2 categories: business, the operational risk and the strategic risk. Right. So this is the risk rating they have used. Right. So likewise, in the annual report, all the information is there. Right. And also, I have uploaded some questions in the LMS as sample questions. Right. So what you can do is you can attempt these questions. So same type of questions will be coming in your examination. Right. For example, so if I show you one practice question, if you have time, I will discuss these things. If you don't have time, I will upload the recording for these things, right? Revision and practice questions discussion for the ethics and the risk management. right? As a help for you. So these type of question will be coming in your examination, right? You can see, right? So there are some questions I have given you regarding the operational risk, strategic risk, and the ERM, right? So this is related to strategic risk, this is related to the operational risk, this is related to the ERM, and this is relating to, yeah, it's also relating to risk. Sorry, it is relating to the ethics, right? And this is also related to the ethics, right? Right. All right. So any questions? Any questions? Guys, do you have any questions? Nothing,
No.
Prakash? All right. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, then let's meet on Saturday. So we are starting the lectures from 1 to 5. Okay. Saturday 1 to 5. Yeah. Any questions? 090? All right. All right. So there
No,
we
sir,
will
all good.
there we will discuss about the strategic risk and the operational risk in different ways. So then we will finish off that, and uh, in the next week we will having another online session. So there we will be discussing about the COSO framework, right? And then we will have the presentation on 26th. So they will then we can finish off, right? So please upload your presentation and the report both together as a zip folder, right? To the LMS, right? So I have made the Dropbox. So when you're uploading, it's better to upload one person, right? For example, sometimes you guys are doing like PPT is uploaded by someone and the report is uploaded by someone else. So what I have to do is I need to look at the PPT and the report, and I need to get a one place. So don't do like that. So one person of your group, for example, the leader can submit the PPT and the presentation. Sorry, PPT and the report, right, as a zip folder, right? So then it will be easy, right? So the deadline would be 26. We are 26 morning. We are starting the presentation sharp at 8, right? So I will, as I mentioned before, I will post the schedule, right? Sharp at 8, we will start. And because we are having the whole day to do the presentation, and the deadline would be 25th July, 11:59 p.m. Right? Right. So I will take all the presentation to my computer afterwards, right? If someone is missed to upload, then the team can't do the presentation. They will not receiving any marks. Right. එදා උදේට presentation එක දාගෙන pen drive එක අරන් එන්න එපා. So I'm not allowed to do that. Right. Right. And also all the members need to be present. If someone is having a kind of a issue or health issue or the personal issue or something else, so please inform prior to the presentation. Right. All right. So thank you very much. Have a good day. Good night. Let's meet on Saturday. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Those who are not recorded your attendance, you can scan and after finishing the scan, can leave the meeting. Thank you. Good night.